The morning sun peeked through the clouds as families started streaming through the entrance of San Diego Zoo. The air was filled with the excited chatter of children and the distant calls of exotic birds. It was just another spring day in 2019, or so everyone thought. The parking lot was filling up steadily when a simple black car pulled in. Nobody paid much attention to the tall man who stepped out, adjusting his well-worn baseball cap and sunglasses. He looked like any other tourist, dressed in comfortable jeans and a plain dark blue t-shirt. But this wasn't just any visitor, it was Keanu Reeves, though he preferred to keep that detail to himself. As he walked through the entrance, a group of school kids rushed past him, their matching yellow t-shirts creating a bright blur of excitement. Their teacher called out, "Remember to stay together," while trying to keep up with their eager pace. Keanu smiled, remembering his own childhood visits to the zoo. The morning was perfect for a zoo visit, not too hot, not too cold. The paths were lined with blooming spring flowers, and the smell of popcorn from nearby stands mixed with the fresh air. Keanu had always loved visiting zoos during his time off. It was one of the few places where he could blend in with the crowd and simply observe the wonders of nature. He stopped to watch the flamingos, their pink feathers creating a beautiful contrast against the blue water. Nearby, a little boy tugged at his mother's sleeve, pointing excitedly at a flamingo that was stretching its long neck. "Mom, look, it's dancing." The pure joy in the child's voice made several visitors smile. Making his way through the zoo, Keanu paused to read the educational signs, genuinely interested in learning about each animal. He'd always had a soft spot for wildlife, and over the years, he'd quietly supported various animal welfare organizations. Not for publicity, he never wanted that, but because he truly cared. The paths were getting more crowded as the morning went on. Families with strollers navigated around teenagers taking selfies with the giraffes in the background. Tour guides led groups of visitors, sharing fascinating facts about the animals. The atmosphere was buzzing with life and excitement. As he approached the primate area, Keanu noticed a growing crowd gathering near the chimpanzee enclosure. A sign announced an upcoming demonstration, and people were already claiming the best viewing spots. He hung back, preferring to observe from a distance. The crowd's excitement was palpable. Children were pointing at the young chimp visible through the glass, while parents readied their cameras. What caught his attention wasn't just the crowd's enthusiasm, but something about the young chimp's behavior. Having spent time learning about primates for a previous role, he noticed subtle signs that others might miss. The baby chimp, who couldn't have been more than a year and a half old, seemed unusually agitated. Keanu checked his watch. The demonstration would start in 15 minutes. He found a spot at the back of the gathering crowd, his height allowing him to see over most people's heads. More visitors were arriving, drawn by the announcement over the zoo's speaker system about the upcoming show. A couple standing next to him shared a zoo map, planning their route for the day. "After this, we should check out the new penguin exhibit," the woman suggested, while her partner nodded, more focused on trying to get a better view of the enclosure. The casual, everyday scene would soon transform into something none of them expected. The air was filled with anticipation as the scheduled time drew closer. Kids were being lifted onto parents' shoulders, and phones were raised, ready to capture whatever was about to happen. But no one, not even Keanu Reeves, could have predicted how this ordinary zoo demonstration would turn into a moment that would change lives, both human and animal. Behind the public paths and cheerful exhibits of the San Diego Zoo, a very different story was unfolding. In the staff-only areas where the real work of animal care took place, not everything was running as smoothly as it appeared to visitors. The morning staff meeting had just wrapped up, and Tom Morton wiped sweat from his forehead as he reviewed his show schedule for the day. 6 months into his job as a junior zookeeper, he was already feeling the pressure. Attendance numbers for his demonstrations were dropping, and his supervisor had made it clear that they needed to improve. Tom hadn't always been this way. When he first started, his eyes would light up every time he talked about the animals. He'd spend extra hours studying their behaviors and would excitedly share interesting facts with anyone who would listen. But somewhere along the way, things had changed. The pressure to make each show more exciting than the last had started to weigh on him. In the primate care area, little Charlie the chimp was making soft cooing sounds from his enclosure. At just 18 months old, He'd already had a tough start to life. His mother had faced complications during birth, leading to a necessary separation that the senior veterinary team had agonized over. They'd made the difficult decision to hand-raise him, knowing it wasn't ideal but necessary for his survival. The senior keepers had developed a careful plan for Charlie's care. It involved minimal human handling, gradual introduction to other young chimps, and natural enrichment activities. Everything was designed to help him develop as normally as possible despite his unusual start in life. But Tom had other ideas. He'd noticed how visitors reacted when Charlie did anything remotely human-like. A simple wave could draw gasps of delight. A somersault would earn thunderous applause. And in Tom's mind, more tricks meant more visitors, which meant job security. That morning, while other staff members were busy with their duties, Tom slipped into the holding area where Charlie stayed before shows. He'd started bringing treats that weren't part of the approved diet plan, sweet fruits that he used to coax the young chimp into performing increasingly complex tricks. "Come on, buddy," he whispered, holding out a piece of mango. "Let's practice that new routine." Charlie reached for the fruit hesitantly. The young chimp had learned that these private sessions usually meant having to do things that made him uncomfortable. In the background, the regular sounds of the zoo's morning routine continued. Golf carts whirred past carrying supplies, senior keepers conducted their rounds, and the veterinary team prepared for their daily health checks. Nobody noticed anything unusual about Tom spending extra time with Charlie. He'd gotten good at making it look like routine care. The zoo's animal welfare handbook sat unopened on a shelf in the break room. Its pages contained clear guidelines about the handling of infant primates, guidelines that Tom had started to view as obstacles rather than protective measures. The document spelled out in detail why young chimps needed consistent, species-appropriate care, not entertainment training. As the morning wore on, Tom's anxiety grew. He promised visitors the best show they'd ever seen on today's schedule board. He knew the zoo's policy was to keep demonstrations educational and natural, but he convinced himself that a few extra tricks wouldn't hurt. After all, didn't happy visitors mean more support for the zoo? Outside, he could hear the growing excitement of the crowd gathering for the morning demonstrations. The familiar sound of children's laughter and excited chatter drifted through the walls. Tom checked his watch. 30 minutes until showtime. He ran through his planned routine in his head, including several new behaviors he'd been pushing Charlie to learn. In his office, the zoo's head veterinarian was reviewing Charlie's latest health reports. Everything looked normal on paper, but something had been bothering him lately about the young chimp's behavior. He'd noticed subtle changes, increased anxiety during health checks, unusual reluctance during morning transfers. He made a note to discuss it at the next staff meeting, unaware of how soon these concerns would come to a head. The morning sun now streamed through the high windows of the behind-the-scenes area, creating patches of warm light on the floor. In one of these sunny spots, Charlie sat quietly, watching the dust motes dance in the beam. For a moment, he looked just like what he was, a baby, far too young to be a performer in anyone's show. The clock ticked closer to demonstration time, and the tension in Tom's shoulders grew. He'd worked out a series of cues and rewards that he was sure would wow the crowd. What he hadn't considered was who might be in that crowd, or how his actions would look to someone who really understood primate behavior. The afternoon sun hung high over the San Diego Zoo as crowds gathered around the primate exhibition area. The air was thick with excitement as families jostled for the best viewing spots. Children pressed their faces against the safety barriers, their eyes wide with anticipation. Nobody suspected that they were about to witness something that would change the zoo forever. Tom stepped out into the demonstration area, wearing his khaki uniform and a bright smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He carried a small training pouch at his hip, filled with unauthorized treats he'd begun using to make the shows more exciting. The crowd quieted as he picked up the microphone, his voice echoing across the viewing area. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our special primate demonstration." His words carried the rehearsed enthusiasm of someone trying too hard to sound natural. "Today, you're going to see something amazing. Our youngest star, Charlie, is going to show you just how incredible these animals can be." At the back of the crowd, Keanu Reeves shifted uncomfortably. Years of working with animal welfare organizations had taught him to recognize the signs of a show prioritizing entertainment over animal well-being. He watched intently as Tom disappeared briefly behind the scenes to retrieve Charlie. When the young chimp emerged, something wasn't right. Charlie's movements were hesitant, his eyes darting around at the crowd. Unlike the natural curiosity typical of young chimps, his body language showed signs of stress. His fingers twisted nervously in the way that primates often do when they're anxious. "Watch this, everyone," Tom announced, pulling out a bright red ball. "Charlie's going to show us some amazing skills." He gestured to the young chimp, using hand signals that weren't part of the zoo's approved communication methods. Charlie looked at the ball, then at Tom, clearly uncertain about what was being asked of him. The crowd leaned forward as Tom began putting Charlie through a series of increasingly demanding tricks. First came the simple waves and spins, things that might seem cute to untrained eyes but were completely unnatural for a young chimp. Then came the more complex demands, walking on hands, performing somersaults, and attempting to juggle small objects. A child in the front row giggled as Charlie dropped one of the balls, but the laughter faded when the young chimp made a distressed sound. Tom quickly tried to cover it up with enthusiastic commentary, but the damage was done. The chimp's vocalizations grew more pronounced, a clear sign of discomfort that any primate expert would recognize immediately. "Come on, buddy, show them the big finish." Tom's voice had an edge to it now, his smile becoming fixed and artificial. He reached for Charlie's arm, guiding him more forcefully than necessary toward a small platform. The young chimp resisted, making soft whimpering sounds that made several parents in the audience exchange worried glances. In the crowd, a zoo volunteer who worked primarily with the big cats felt her stomach tighten. She'd been trained to recognize signs of animal distress, and everything about this scene was setting off alarm bells. She wasn't the only one noticing. Several visitors had lowered their cameras, their excitement turning to concern. Charlie's distress became more evident as Tom pushed him to perform a particularly difficult sequence of movements. The young chimp's cries became more urgent, a sound that would break any animal lover's heart. Some children in the audience began to look upset, tugging at their parents' sleeves and asking why the baby monkey was sad. The atmosphere had shifted completely. What had started as an entertaining show had transformed into something that made everyone uncomfortable. A few people began to step away from the viewing area, while others watched with growing concern. The excited chatter had been replaced by worried whispers and uncomfortable shuffling. Keanu wasn't the only one taking mental notes anymore. A retired veterinarian in the crowd was documenting everything on her phone, her professional experience telling her that this wasn't right. A university student studying zoology had pulled out a notebook, recording behaviors that clearly violated standard animal welfare protocols. Tom, seemingly oblivious to the changing mood of his audience, pressed on with the show. He was focused solely on completing his planned routine, missing all the signs that should have told him to stop. Each trick became more forced, each movement more unnatural for the young chimp. The tension in the air was palpable as Charlie became increasingly distressed. His small hands reached out toward the back of the enclosure, as if looking for an escape route. This wasn't the behavior of an animal enjoying positive interaction. This was a baby primate in genuine distress. What happened next would be described differently by various witnesses, but everyone agreed on one thing. It was the moment that forced everyone to acknowledge that something had gone very wrong at the San Diego Zoo. And in the back of the crowd, a famous actor was already moving quietly toward the administration building, determined to make sure this situation wouldn't continue for one more day. As the uncomfortable demonstration continued, Keanu Reeves quietly made his way through the dispersing crowd. His heart was heavy with what he'd just witnessed, but his steps were purposeful. Having worked with various animal welfare organizations over the years, he knew exactly what needed to be done and how to do it effectively. The path to the administration building wound past several other exhibits, but Keanu barely noticed the curious meerkats or the graceful flamingos this time. His mind was replaying every detail he'd observed: the young chimp's distressed movements, the keeper's forceful handling, and the clear violations of proper animal care protocols. At the administration building's entrance, a staff member looked up from her computer, ready to give the usual visitor directions. She paused when she recognized who was standing before her, but Keanu's serious expression told her this wasn't a moment for fan interaction. "I need to speak with someone in charge of animal welfare," he said quietly. "It's urgent." The staff member, picking up on the gravity of the situation, quickly made a call. Within minutes, the zoo's deputy director of animal care hurried into the reception area. She was a veteran of 20 years in animal welfare, someone who took any potential concern seriously. The fact that the person reporting these concerns happened to be a famous actor was secondary to the urgency in his voice. In the meeting room, Keanu removed his cap and sunglasses, leaning forward as he detailed everything he'd observed. His description was precise, informed by his experiences working with animal welfare experts during various film projects. He spoke about the specific behaviors he'd noticed in the young chimp, the unnatural movements being forced, and the clear signs of distress that any trained observer would recognize. "I understand this is delicate," he said, his voice carrying the same gentle intensity that had made him famous, "but that young chimp needs help. What I saw out there," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "it's not just about one bad show. There are patterns of behavior that suggest this has been going on for a while." The deputy director took detailed notes, a frown deepening with each new piece of information. She asked specific questions about timing, behaviors, and exact actions she could investigate. This wasn't the first time a visitor had raised concerns, she admitted, but never with such detailed observations. Meanwhile, outside her office, word was spreading quietly among the senior staff. The veterinary team, who had their own concerns about Charlie's recent behavior changes, quickly prepared documentation of their observations. A senior keeper who had noticed unusual patterns in the young chimp's feeding schedule stepped forward with her own records. Keanu stayed for over an hour, working with the team to document everything properly. He could have simply made a complaint and left, but that wasn't his style. He wanted to ensure that real change would happen. When someone offered to call the media, highlighting his involvement, he firmly declined. This wasn't about publicity, it was about protecting a vulnerable animal. The deputy director assured him that immediate action would be taken. She explained the zoo's protocols for investigating animal welfare concerns, the steps that would be taken to protect Charlie, and the process for reviewing all primate handling procedures. Keanu listened intently, asking thoughtful questions about follow-up and oversight. As the meeting concluded, activity behind the scenes was already ramping up. Security footage was being pulled, staff schedules were being reviewed, and the veterinary team was preparing for a complete health assessment of Charlie. The wheels of change were turning, set in motion by someone who could have easily looked the other way. Walking back through the zoo, Keanu passed the now quiet primate exhibition area. The afternoon crowds had moved on to other attractions, unaware of the significant changes their visit had sparked. He paused for a moment, watching as other chimps moved peacefully in their enclosure. His actions today would help ensure that their young companion would soon be receiving the care he deserved. Just before leaving, he took a business card from the deputy director, not for publicity, but to ensure he could follow up on Charlie's progress. As he drove away from the zoo, his thoughts weren't on his next film project or public appearance, but on a young chimp who would soon have a better life thanks to people willing to speak up and take action. The next few hours at the San Diego Zoo were unlike anything the staff had seen before. While visitors continued enjoying their day, watching penguins waddle and lions lounge in the sun, a flurry of activity was taking place behind the scenes. The peaceful afternoon atmosphere in the administrative offices had transformed into focused energy as teams mobilized to address the situation with Charlie. In the security office, two senior staff members hunched over computer screens, reviewing footage from the past month. What they found made their hearts sink. The cameras had captured numerous unauthorized training sessions, each one showing increasingly concerning behavior. The morning's incident wasn't a one-time occurrence, it was the peak of a troubling pattern. "Look at this," one security officer said, pointing to footage from 3 days ago. "He's entering the holding area outside of documented times." His colleague nodded grimly, adding another note to their already lengthy report. They'd been at it for hours, but nobody was complaining about the overtime. Everyone understood the importance of their task. Meanwhile, the zoo's veterinary team had sprung into action. The head vet, who had earlier noted concerns about Charlie's behavior, was now conducting a thorough health assessment. The young chimp seemed relieved to be in familiar, gentle hands. As they worked, they documented everything, every stress indicator, every unusual reaction, building a comprehensive picture of what Charlie had endured. The deputy director's office had become command central. Phone calls flew back and forth as she coordinated with the zoo's board members, animal welfare organizations, and legal team. Her desktop was covered with sticky notes and reports, each one representing another piece of the puzzle they were putting together. "We need to move quickly but carefully," she explained to her team during an emergency meeting. "This isn't just about one keeper or one animal. We need to review all our procedures to ensure nothing like this can happen again." Her words carried the weight of responsibility, and every person in the room felt it. In the primate care area, the atmosphere was tense but focused. Senior keepers worked to establish a new routine for Charlie, one that would help him feel secure again. They'd brought in extra enrichment items, soft blankets, favorite toys, and special treats approved by the veterinary team. Every movement around his enclosure was slow and predictable, designed to help him feel safe. A young keeper who had recently joined the team approached her supervisor with tears in her eyes. "I saw things that didn't seem right," she admitted. "But I didn't know who to tell or if anyone would listen." Her supervisor listened carefully, adding her observations to the growing file of evidence. This was a learning moment for everyone. Speaking up about concerns should never feel impossible. The zoo's training coordinator set up camp in the break room, beginning the process of reviewing every animal handling protocol. She spread documents across the table, highlighting areas that needed strengthening. "We're going to make sure every single staff member understands these guidelines," she said to nobody in particular, her determination evident in her voice. As evening approached, the investigation team gathered in the conference room. The walls were covered with timeline charts and incident reports. They'd been working nonstop since Keanu's visit, and the picture was clear. Tom's actions hadn't just violated zoo policies, they'd betrayed the trust placed in him as a caregiver. Outside, the last visitors were heading toward the exit gates. The gift shop was closing up, and the carousel had played its final tune for the day. But in the administrative buildings, lights still burned bright. Nobody was leaving until they had a solid plan in place for Charlie's care and new measures to prevent future incidents. The deputy director made one final call before ending her day, to the phone number Keanu had left. She updated him on their progress, impressed by his continued concern for Charlie's welfare. His celebrity status hadn't been mentioned once during their conversation. This was simply about doing right by a vulnerable animal in their care. As night fell over the zoo, things were already changing. New signs had been posted in staff areas about reporting concerns. Security patrols had been adjusted to include more frequent checks of animal holding areas. And most importantly, Charlie was sleeping peacefully, watched over by experienced keepers who understood what care really meant. The next morning dawned bright and clear at the San Diego Zoo, but things were noticeably different. The usual morning bustle had a new sense of purpose to it. Staff members moved with extra awareness, their morning routines now including additional checks and balances that hadn't existed just days before. In the administration building, the deputy director sat at her desk, reviewing the final investigation report. The document was thorough, leaving no room for doubt about what needed to be done. Tom's employment was terminated, effective immediately. But this was just the beginning of the changes rolling through the zoo. "We're implementing new oversight measures," she explained to her gathered staff. The meeting room was packed, with people standing along the walls. Everyone wanted to be part of this moment. Every animal demonstration will now have 2 senior keepers present, no exceptions. Heads nodded in agreement as she continued outlining the new procedures. The zoo's social media coordinator carefully crafted a public statement. There was no mention of the celebrity involvement, respecting Keanu's wish for privacy, but the message was clear. The zoo was committed to the highest standards of animal care, and any deviation from these standards would be addressed immediately. In the primate care area, the difference was already visible. 2 experienced keepers worked together, documenting every interaction with Charlie and the other primates. Their movements were gentle, their voices soft. The young chimp was responding positively to the change, showing more natural behaviors and less anxiety. The veterinary team had set up a new monitoring system. Charts tracking eating habits, sleep patterns, and social interactions hung on the wall. "Look at this," the head vet pointed out to a colleague. "His stress indicators are already dropping." They were recording everything, building a model of care that could be shared with other zoos. Throughout the day, staff members attended new training sessions. The room was silent except for the scratching of pens on paper as they learned updated protocols. Remember, the trainer emphasized, if something doesn't feel right, speak up. We're all responsible for their well-being. In the break room, younger staff members gathered during lunch, discussing the changes. I feel more confident now, one keeper shared. Knowing there's a clear system for reporting concerns makes a huge difference. Others nodded in agreement. The culture was shifting, and everyone could feel it. The zoo's board of directors convened an emergency meeting to review the entire incident. The discussion wasn't just about what had gone wrong, it was about creating lasting change. They approved new funding for additional training programs and increased staffing levels to ensure proper oversight. Visitors noticed the changes too. The morning primate demonstrations were different now. Instead of flashy tricks, they saw natural behaviors. Keepers explained how chimps lived in the wild, what they ate, and how they interacted with their families. Children still pressed against the viewing glass, just as fascinated by these authentic moments as they had been by the forced performances. A team of experts arrived from other prestigious zoos to review the new procedures. They walked through every area, making notes and offering suggestions. This wasn't just about fixing one problem. It was about setting new standards for the entire industry. The zoo's education department worked overtime, creating new materials about animal welfare and natural behaviors. We want our visitors to understand why these changes matter, the education director explained to her team. It's about respect for these amazing creatures in our care. In the employee locker room, a new poster caught everyone's eye. It wasn't flashy or demanding, just a simple reminder. Their well-being is our responsibility. Below it, a clear list of steps to report any concerns, with multiple contact options to ensure everyone's voice could be heard. As the sun set on another busy day, the deputy director made her usual rounds. She paused at the primate enclosure, watching Charlie play naturally with his enrichment toys. No forced behaviors, no unnatural tricks, just a young chimp being exactly what he was meant to be. The sight brought a smile to her face, knowing that sometimes the best changes come from difficult moments. The day ended with another call to Keanu, updating him on the progress. His genuine interest in Charlie's welfare hadn't wavered. He listened intently to the changes being implemented, asking thoughtful questions about their long-term sustainability. His final words were simple but meaningful. Thank you for doing the right thing. 3 months had passed since that pivotal day at the San Diego Zoo, and the changes were remarkable. The morning sun cast a warm glow over the primate enclosure as visitors gathered for the day's first demonstration. But this wasn't the same show they would have seen before. It was something much more special. Charlie, now thriving under proper care, moved confidently around his habitat. His eyes were bright and curious, his movements natural and playful. Gone were the forced tricks and unnatural behaviors. Instead, visitors watched in wonder as he explored enrichment puzzles, showing off his natural intelligence in ways that made everyone smile. The new headkeeper stepped forward to begin the morning talk. Her voice was warm and passionate as she explained how chimps live in the wild. Watch how Charlie figures out how to use that stick to get his breakfast, she pointed out, as the young chimp demonstrated tool use, a natural behavior that fascinated the crowd even more than the old tricks had. Behind the scenes, the positive changes were even more apparent. The primate care area had become a model of best practices. Other zoos regularly sent their staff to learn from the new protocols put in place. Charts tracking Charlie's progress lined the walls, showing steady improvement in everything from his social interactions to his sleeping patterns. One quiet Tuesday morning, a familiar figure slipped into the zoo wearing his signature baseball cap. Keanu had kept his promise to check on Charlie's progress, making occasional unannounced visits. He stood at the back of the crowd, a smile spreading across his face as he watched the young chimp confidently exploring his environment. The deputy director spotted him and walked over quietly. "He's like a different chimp now," she said softly. Keanu nodded, watching as Charlie playfully rolled around with some enrichment toys. "All the other improvements have been amazing too," she continued. "Your speaking up that day, it changed everything." The zoo's new training program had become the gold standard in the industry. Staff members from across the country came to learn about their enhanced oversight measures and reporting systems. The culture of speaking up about concerns had spread beyond the primate area to every department in the zoo. In the staff break room, a wall of photos showed Charlie's transformation, from the anxious young chimp of 3 months ago to the confident, playful animal he'd become. Next to the photos hung thank you letters from visitors who appreciated the zoo's commitment to authentic animal care. The education department had developed new programs focusing on natural behaviors and conservation. School groups now learned about the importance of letting animals be themselves, understanding that the most amazing things about wildlife were their natural behaviors, not trained performances. Charlie's story had inspired changes at other zoos too. The ripple effect spread across the country as other facilities reviewed their own practices. What started as one person speaking up about one animal had grown into a movement for better care standards everywhere. Visitors noticed the difference. "It's so much better now," one regular guest commented to a keeper. "Seeing them act naturally, learning about their real behaviors, it's fascinating." Children still pressed against the viewing glass with excitement, but now they were asking questions about how chimps lived in the wild. The veterinary team's latest report showed Charlie was meeting all his developmental milestones. He'd even started forming bonds with other young chimps in neighboring enclosures, something that would have been impossible during his performing days. His play behaviors, eating habits, and social interactions all pointed to a healthy, well-adjusted young primate. One afternoon, as the sun began to set, the deputy director found a small package in her office. Inside was a handwritten note from Keanu, along with a donation to the zoo's conservation programs. "Thank you for making sure one voice could make a difference," it read. "Charlie's story will help protect other animals for years to come." As darkness fell over the zoo, Charlie curled up in his favorite sleeping spot, surrounded by soft blankets and familiar toys. The nightkeeper smiled as she did her final checks. This was how it should be. A young chimp just being a chimp, no performances required. The story of the day a Hollywood star quietly spoke up for a baby chimp became a teaching moment at the zoo's staff training sessions. Not because of who he was, but because it showed that anyone who sees something wrong has the power to make it right. Charlie's transformation proved that positive change is always possible when people care enough to take action.